Welcome to Mill History Talk. I'm your host. And today we're asking a question that's deceptively simple but critical to the profession of arms. Why must military officers study military history? Not why should they, or why might it be useful, but why is it necessary? Because in a profession where life and death hangs in the balance, missions and national interests are at stake, an optional understanding of history isn't good enough. Let's get into it. The profession of arms demands something more than technical skill. It demands judgment, especially under pressure. And judgment, as we know, doesn't come out of thin air. It's built over time through training, experience, and reflection. But one of the most powerful and underutilized tools in that development is military history. History offers something training and doctrine alone can't. It expands your frame of reference. It's the only record we have of how real people confronted the same kinds of problems military leaders face today: fog of war, logistical nightmares, moral dilemmas, and sudden reversals. It adds to your personal experience the knowledge of the experience of others. It hugely expands your conceptual horizons. Consider Operation Desert Storm. General Norman Schwarzkopf's famous left hook wasn't some tactical epiphany. It was the result of he and his staff as military professionals studying past campaigns, especially in North Africa during World War II, and gleaning from that study insights into how maneuver warfare could be applied in a modern setting. He didn't guess. He judged. His and his staff's judgment was rooted in history. Here's another hard truth. You can't understand today's operational environment without history. Every military challenge today, be it in the Baltic, the South China Sea, or cyberspace, is the product of historical forces. NATO's Eastern posture? That's a Cold War residue. The instability in the Middle East? You can't make sense of it without understanding colonial borders, tribal politics, and decades of foreign intervention. The same goes for understanding our recent experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. Tactical errors weren't the main issue early on, it was historical ignorance. Without knowing the legacies of British rule in Mesopotamia or Soviet tactics in the 80s, leaders and advisors walked into traps they didn't see coming. Studying those precedents could have provided operational insight and avoided strategic missteps. Knowing and studying history doesn't give you the right answer. Rather, it helps you understand, ask the right questions, and ultimately, combined with doctrine, experience, and critical thinking, arrive at the uniquely right answer to the problem you are facing. But history isn't just about getting the right answer. It's also about cultivating the right mindset. Ulysses S. Grant at Shiloh in 1862. He's caught off guard. His army is battered. Most leaders would have cracked, but Grant doesn't. When General Sherman remarks to Grant, "Well, Grant, we've had the devil's own day, haven't we?" A determined Grant, his mind already made up, responded, "Yes, lick 'em tomorrow, though." He understood that early failures are part of war. He understood from history that sometimes the more determined side will win even when the adversary has the apparent tactical advantage. Thus, Grant knew that the battle was not over, and he was determined to change the outcome. The next day, he turned the tide. Dunkirk's another example. The British Army's arrival there was a national disaster, but the withdrawal of most of the army intact across the English Channel was a phenomenal logistical feat. It was a national moment of resilience rooted in cultural memory and institutional learning from World War I, which would become a rallying cry for the nation through the rest of World War II. The message? History helps commanders and leaders endure, not just tactically, but psychologically. It trains the mind to understand adversity, adapt, and recover. Another reason for understanding military history is that it lies at the core of understanding the advancement of military art and science. Military art is dynamic, constantly changing in response to changing society and advancing technology. Central to the advancement of military art and science is what might be called the cycle of military art: history, theory, doctrine, and practice. Here's how it works. History records the results of past military actions and operations. Theorists study these records and develop theories to explain those results. Doctrine turns theoretical conclusions into guidance for future operations, and practice puts it all to the test in the next military operation. Then, the cycle repeats. When that loop functions, you get progress, the advancement of the military art. An example of this is the U.S. military experience in Iraq. After 2 years of a rising insurgency in Iraq 2000 2003 to 2005, Operation Iraqi Freedom was not achieving its goals. The U.S. Army Combined Arms Command studied the history of the first 2 years and compared it to the history of previous successful and unsuccessful counterinsurgency operations. That study determined that classic counterinsurgency theory was sound, but the U.S. was not following it in operations. And one reason was that classic counterinsurgency theory had not been translated into U.S. military doctrine. From 2004 to 2006, the Army wrote Field Manual 3-24, Counterinsurgency. It provided doctrinal guidelines regarding how to achieve success in counterinsurgency. By 2007, the U.S. strategy in Iraq changed and put into practice the new doctrine. Ultimately, the insurgency in Iraq was successfully pacified. Thus, the study of history in that case reflected both a departure from previous proven theory and that one of the causes was a lack of effective doctrine. Once the new doctrine, based on classic theory, was written and disseminated and practiced, the command in Iraq began to achieve success. This positive example of how the loop works to advance the military art in specific situations is simplified for illustrative purposes, but is relatively true and reflects how this military art loop works. When this loop is not working, this is reflected in failed military operations. The Soviets, in Afghanistan, classic case of ignoring history, clinging to rigid doctrine, and misapplying theory in the wrong kind of war. This loop isn't academic. It's operational. It's how militaries evolve, or fail to. And at its foundation, it starts with military history. Now let's talk leadership. War's not just strategy and supply chains, it's people. And history is packed with lessons in leadership under fire. Eisenhower managing egos and alliances. Nimitz balancing strategic risk in the Pacific. Clausewitz reflecting on Prussian collapse and reinvention. These are real-world examples that teach nuance, patience, and clarity. They also reveal the human side of military command, the tension, the mistakes, the course corrections. Studying these leaders doesn't make you one of them, but it helps you think clearly, understand complex human dynamics, and ask the right questions when your own moment comes. Let's not forget the military theorists whose ideas about warfare have survived time and are now considered fundamental historical insights into the way warfare is practiced, even if some of their insights remain controversial to this day. Clausewitz, Jomini, Sun Tzu, Mahan Duhe. They weren't armchair thinkers. They were practitioners who reflected deeply on history before creating insights into war's hard lessons. Clausewitz fought and reformed. Jomini wrote from the front lines. Sun Tzu? His principles on deception and flexibility are still echoing in today's hybrid warfare and gray zone conflicts. Their value isn't in formulas. It's in frameworks. They help officers think in terms of cause and effect, friction and force, morale and momentum. They represent the fact that thinking deeply and correctly about warfare and how to use history to inform and guide that thinking is the essential first step toward conducting warfare effectively. History doesn't predict the future, but it prepares you for it. Military decisions on force structure, technology investment, organization, and doctrine are all based on a vision of what future warfare will look like. That vision is better and more likely to be accurate when it is based on military history. Mechanized warfare, air power, cyber, they didn't come out of nowhere. They emerged from people studying military history to identify trends in technology and recent operations that may portend characteristics of future war. Those who correctly identified the fundamental historical trends first and inculcated them into doctrine greatly enhanced their likelihood of practical success when executed in operations. And when history is ignored, that's when forces walk into a new war thinking it'll be just like the last one, and it never is. Think of the fall of France in 1940. Britain and France fielded modern armies with a high level of technology. But these armies and many of their leaders were largely trained and equipped to fight the last war. Their commanders envisioned a World War I type war and were completely defeated in just 6 weeks by the progressive German army that practiced a brand new vision of war. The French and British were focused on refighting the last war, while the German leadership was focused on leveraging new technologies to fight a new kind of war in the future. So, why must military officers study history? Because history is fundamental to good judgment, adaptability, strategic vision, and leadership. It's not just about being well-rounded. It's about being innovative, adaptable, and ready, mentally, morally, operationally, for the uncertainty of war. Military history isn't a luxury. It isn't just nice to know. It's an essential weapon, not in the hand, but in the mind. So read the campaigns, study the defeats, understand the leaders and their dilemmas, and most importantly, use that knowledge to become the kind of professional the military profession needs and demands. This concludes our discussion of the relevancy of military history. This has been Mil History Talk. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, keep reading, keep thinking, and keep your judgment sharp.